And we're live.
Hello, everybody. Howdy, Lisa.
Hey, Josh, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Good to be on here. I think we should let people know. Um, well, we had a few little technical issues, but our conversation actually starts promptly at 7 on Instagram. But the way
Mhm.
we have it set up, we really neither one have access to a clock.
Yeah, it's so sometimes it runs a little longer there because we are literally eyeballing
Yeah,
the
yeah,
conversation.
and sometimes the conversation gets really interesting, and we don't want to give it up. So there is some shifting around on that, but consequently, it's easy to keep up with this. You just start on Instagram at 7, and then follow us through. We have the same topic, but we very rarely cover the same information.
That's true. We do try to mix it up a little bit so it's not boring.
Yeah, so you don't you're rarely getting the same show. Of course, we sometimes had notes, sometimes we don't. Um, we're oftentimes just going on our personal experiences and our personal opinions, and backgrounds on that. So we really couldn't create the same show twice if we tried.
Well, no, we really couldn't. That would entail more planning.
and and who wants to do more planning? Not us, apparently. And but it's also, there's, because of the fact we are dealing with similar but not identical information. We do encourage everybody to follow Dark Ozarks on Instagram as well. It's a good platform. Instagram's a lot of fun, and we have a lot of fun over there, as well as right here on Facebook.
That's true. And tonight we're going to have a lot of fun because it's just a fun topic. Um, and thanks, Josh, for throwing it out today. And,
Oh,
and so that
thank
we get to talk about just what we really enjoy and less work today.
That's right. And thank you, Lisa. You put together a phenomenally comprehensive list over multiple states, and for the Ozarks, ghost hunting in the Ozarks. Although, as we were talking about on Instagram, we kind of prefer the term ghost watching, um, but it has less bang for the buck in terms of getting folks interested.
That's right. That's right. In fact, a lot of investigators and paranormal researchers do not like the term ghost hunter, uh, for that reason that it's sort of a pulp fiction kind of term, 1930s pulp fiction novel. But it is what it is. And one thing I do want to pull over from our conversation over on Instagram very briefly is uh, you put out there in our conversation earlier today, good question of, that most people think they want to be a ghost hunter at
Yes,
some point. And I think there's several influences that drive people to that assumption.
mm,
Um, one is just media, and it starts out very early, and for people our age, Scooby Doo, things like that,
yeah,
uh, introduced everyone to the subject, uh, graduating on to movies and things like that, and then of course reality TV shows
yes,
about ghost hunting. Um, and but that forms an expectation that people have of the activity.
it does. It
Uh,
does. And that
Another,
expectation is truncated at best.
it is, well, you know, media, whether it's film or TV, is a short format, and it's designed to have action and drama uh, in a short time period. And I think people expect that. Um,
It
Another, oh, go
okay.
ahead.
I
No,
was
go
just gonna
ahead.
say it is we don't realize it because it tends to be just what we experience in terms of media, but much of later 20th century media is is essentially heightened theater.
It is kind of replacing the stage and more traditional theatrical type presentations in film, like musicals and so forth.
And which is awesome, but to mistake that for real life. And I think it's one of the reasons that podcasts are so popular, because it's actually putting, a long form podcast allows two people or more to have an interesting conversation. Of course, we're mirroring that in this format, but a real investigation obviously is very different.
It is another source of expectation people come from are spook houses.
Yes, and that's an interesting tie-in that I had not thought of until you brought it up.
Yeah, and I see that a lot with people who come on public events, public tours with us, is that they want to know, one, people will ask, is this a spook house? No.
Yeah.
And two, are something going to jump out at me? And if it does, it's not planned. But that sort of adrenaline thrill expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the other thing really comes from, as you termed a rite of passage in our culture of, the going out to the spooky cemetery, the creepy road that has the headless ghost or whatever legend associated, and putting yourself out there. And I think people want to recapture that sort of experience, but hopefully with something with more substance.
I agreed. And there is obviously just sort of the desire to for an adrenaline thrill. It's I think very similar to a roller coaster.
Mhm.
Something that I observed on a ghost tour or a haunted tour in Springfield. It was pretty well done. But I noticed a very interesting shift in the attendees, that they were going in like this was urban entertainment, and then as some of the stories got related, you could feel the energy change in the room, that it became very unsettling for them to consider the possibility that this could be real.
Yes.
And then when they were presented with some admittedly cute sort of, we're giving you your money's worth theatrics, nobody was jumping out.
Yeah.
But there were just some, we'll call them seasonal props, that were arrayed, which were quite cute. I think they were from Lowe's, and
12-foot.
yeah. And as that progressed, then you see, watching the predominantly sort of early middle-aged suburban couples on a Halloween date be transitioned conceptually or contextually transitioned back to their suburban world where nothing is out of place.
Yes. And it's always interesting to observe. And often in that kind of situation, especially when you have couples, and often it will be groups of two or three couples that have come together, and you starting out, you can tell who the skeptic is, who got drug along, and it's usually one of the husbands.
Mhm.
And then over the course of the evening, it's ironic, because often the one that was the most skeptical becomes the most interested.
That is interesting. That is, there's a lot of human psychology at play, a lot of human energy at play, and of course, in many of these cases, we're dealing with locations that ostensibly are the the home ground of human spirits, ghosts.
Exactly. And you brought up earlier on Instagram that in a lot of these locations, you really have to view whatever energy is there. They're the residents and we're the guests.
And we're the guests. It is, and in some cases, obviously, there is highly antagonistic energy, regardless of what you brought into the space. Uh,
Yes, they
but
could be.
but that is comparatively quite rare. And what is much more common is, again, wrapping your head around the idea of contextualizing it as residents of a location who simply deserve respect.
Exactly. And example I give people is that, we know odd things happen in places. We don't always know why. And these energies are there. We another sort of shield people will try to tell themselves we can just banish anything. If I don't want it there, I can make it go away. And that really isn't the case, despite a lot of what's presented in the media and some investigators who will tout, oh, I can get rid of anything. It doesn't usually happen that way. And I've been called into a number of places after someone's done that, because it usually just ramps up activity afterwards. But that, you could be sitting down to breakfast and eating cereal with someone every day that you can't see. And
Yeah.
and and those notions are often where you can tell someone who's interested in ghost hunting is either going to say, no, nope, not me, I'm done, or tell me more. And they're in 1 or 2%.
Yes. Yes. So I think without any more explanation, let's jump into some of these locations. You mentioned, I want to start with the location you mentioned in Oklahoma.
Okay. Fort Gibson.
Yes.
Fort Gibson is really a true frontier fort. Some of the buildings or parts of them are original to the 1830s. Um, Others have been rebuilt over time. But and sort of a trivia note of sort of George Washington slept here kind of thing. Um, Jefferson Davis, who went, who of course, most people when they think about Confederate officers and so forth forget that most of them were federal army officers, and
Yes.
Jefferson Davis had been as well. And his first posting was actually to Fort Gibson in the 1830s.
Wow.
And so you're there, and you can just almost touch that history and think of, well, if something had happened to him then, history may have changed dramatically.
Yes.
But it is a very somber place, and where some of the Civil War era forts and so forth in the area tend to have activity in the buildings. At Fort Gibson, it's on the grounds. Um,
Mhm.
and the Rangers are actually pretty candid about talking. Some places, a lot of battlefields, oh no, we don't have ghosts, nothing ever happens here. Um, but they're pretty candid about it, and they talk about um, phantom campfires, phantom encampments, looking out and seeing 1800 era looking tents and campfires, uh, as if the fort were running, because they didn't all have barracks. Um, and it was very active during the Civil War. Um, it was in Indian territory, and there were supply trains that um, ran between Fort Gibson and Fort Scott up in Kansas. And protecting those supply trains was one of the top priorities in the Western theater. And so it was very common for the supply trains to be attacked by Confederate guerrillas and Partisan Rangers. And so you had a lot of activity that mirrored more sort of the later Old West, robbing the train, robbing the coaches, that kind of thing. And it's really as if that those people are still there and going about their activities.
Mm. And whereabouts is this located?
Um, let's see. It is south of Tahlequah. I forget exactly how far, maybe 50 miles, something like that. I may be off a little bit.
Oh, no worries. I wanted to start in with Oklahoma, really because many people don't realize that the Ozarks extend well into eastern Oklahoma.
Mhm. They
So
do,
it's
despite one of our very ardent fans who tells us otherwise, but
I appreciate that. It it is, and it is something that whether it's personal stories or it's something that I really appreciate about, or it's geography, that I appreciate about the Ozarks is that many people who grow up here have a great deal of sense of ownership, and that ownership may not be a regionally global understanding necessarily.
yeah,
And I can't guarantee that I always have a regionally global understanding of what's going on here in the Ozarks as well. But there is a certain sense that for many people, it's these are my Ozarks, and if you feel like that, an element of that is being contradicted, it's easy to respond confrontationally. And in all fairness, I respect that. It's part of our heritage as well.
it is, and but uh, but I know in essence it's just a good fun, um, uh, but yes, Oklahoma is in part the Ozarks. I guess if you're kind of looking at that area, very uh, one of our favorite haunted places there would be the Coleman Theater.
Oh yeah, yeah, which is definitely part of the Ozarks borderlands, in Miami, Oklahoma. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to getting back there comparatively soon. It's a beautiful location. What is We'll just pick one. What is your favorite? This is going to sound so cliche. What is your favorite ghost from the Coleman Theater?
Oh boy, that is kind of hard. I like whoever is on the stage. There's a someone on the stage. Different people think maybe it's one of the old theater manager, or maybe a performer um, who at times is seen peeking out behind the curtain. Um, has been known to knock items off the stage. Um, and I don't know. I just find that so interesting because we've had occasion when we've been there that people have seen it behind us and that.
And although this is probably just shifting temperatures and that sort of thing, but I remember, I think the last time that we were there, some very interesting noises during the presentation when we were on stage, and then bits of plaster falling onto the stage directly behind us.
Yes, yes, which is definitely on. Doesn't typically happen, and I don't exactly recall what was being discussed at the time. But I remember us joking that we weren't happy with something said, but
It was, it is one of those things that was a bit unsettling. Um, and something that's very seems very consistent for me is if you tell me, for example, if we're moving into a space and someone tells me, well, we're getting ready to go into the most haunted section of it whatsoever, whatever, that's probably the area that I'm going to have the least picking up anything
yeah.
about. And yet things will happen when it is unanticipated.
Well, and that's usually my experience is that's often the case. Um, Another area there, of course, is the green room. a lot of people have seen things, including seen a ballerina warming up in there. Just a lot of feelings of foreboding. Sometimes people just don't want to walk in there. And of course, the basement, which at one point, um, the previous building had a funeral home in the basement, and it burned down and actually the foundation is the foundation of the theater now. And then
Yes.
before that, even before that, it was the first jail from like the 1850s or something like that. So,
Right. And that brings up an interesting point that I think we can get into, is that there are some locations that really fit the bill of an expected haunted location.
mhm.
Um, and I would say I would argue that the Coleman is one of them, just because it is so out of the ordinary. It is a it it's incredibly beautiful. It's also quite old now, around 100, I would anticipate. Are we still a little under?
1929, I believe. So very
Okay,
close.
yeah, so we're coming up on its centennial. um the exterior is a Spanish mission slash Arabic design. The interior is
Sly.
yes.
Based on Sly.
Yes. So uh um 18th century France. It's extraordinary, but obviously, because it is so, it is what it is. So you can go in and you can think, wow, this could be haunted.
Hmm.
um but some of the occurrences are associated with the stuff, as you said, that preceded the construction of the Coleman. And the same thing happens. Of course, the Coleman has the added benefit that it looks super gloriously beautiful and old and could be haunted on its own right. But interestingly enough, it honest in many cases, you like could set a Hardee's um, on top of a haunted location, and then your Hardee's would be haunted. Um, in ostensibly, the I believe it's the y'all's new library
Hmm.
in Joplin. I think I'm trying to remember. It's the one that you
Old
recorded the
library.
books. Was that?
Well, it's the now old library because they built a new one further south, but it was the new library until a couple of years ago. Um, it is built on the site of the Connor Hotel,
Yes.
um, and that's in Joplin. And it is the building is very much haunted, and I think most of it does come from the Connor.
Mm.
Um, and that's one of my favorite haunted places as well. Uh, it's empty right now. The university is moving, is going to have space in there for a dental school. But and my favorite experience there, uh, a couple, but one in particular is the people don't think about it, but there's a lot of suicides in nice hotels because people
Yes.
check in a nice place to check out. So that it's so family don't find them usually, I think.
Yes.
And particularly back in the day when media was not what it is today, and everything is news and everything is mass consumed, every detail of everything. Um, Often those incidents were not advertised or were not in the paper and so forth or on TV. And so there was always a question of how many suicides there had been in the hotel. And then in the late 60s, a concierge who had worked there since he was a teenager and he was retiring in his late 60s, ended up talking about experiences with the paper, and he did confirm that he knew of about 10 suicides in the building. And he had a slight frame, and he unfortunately had the unfortunate job of when someone didn't check out, he was small enough that they would send him through the transom windows above the doors to find out what happened.
Oh, yeah.
And he had ended up finding about 10 people. And he said the one that stuck with him the most was a well-to-do, nicely dressed woman in a fur coat, and this was in the 1940s, had come in and checked into a room on the 8th floor and had ordered a milkshake and then jumped out the window.
Wow.
And one evening, we were investigating, and several members of the library staff were there, and a couple of other local historians were our guests. And we're in the main reading room area, and I just asked, is the lady who ordered a milkshake on the 8th floor with us? That's all I said. And everyone present heard a woman kind of wail, oh, and it's loud enough. We all turn around and look in the same direction. And so that definitely kind of stuck with you. And then the other is, and I'm sure I've told you this, the hotel was named after one of the owners, Thomas Connor, who died while it was being constructed. And he was an early founding businessman in the area, and was known for his sense of humor and practical jokes and so forth. And one evening, we're investigating, and one of the investigators asked the question, is Mr. Connor with us tonight? Nothing's heard audibly, but on audio recording, you hear a man with a fairly thick Irish brogue who sounds like he's had a pint or two, and going, oh, he and I have been known to, and he starts mumbling. Just
Wow.
day.
It is. Oh my gosh. Now, I think what is super interesting, each of these locations, we've got Fort Gibson, the Coleman, now the old location of the Connor. Something that is often a commonality is what, for lack of a better term, would be a threshold space where in life and potentially beyond that, there's transit.
Well, that's true in those spaces, but it's not always that way. You often have
No.
them in private homes and new construction even. It's funny you mentioned that you mentioned the Hardys. I do know of a number of restaurants, fast food places, even grocery stores where people have told me of the hauntings that they have. And often it seems to be related to either an employee who passed away and that seems to still be working, or a loyal customer or something like that.
Yeah. And it's it's a good reason for good customer service and treating your employees well, because they may not leave.
That's true.
And something that is consistently interesting to me because of this, and I think it's one of the reasons I find haunting so interesting, is that the residual of the haunting may continue even after the landscape has changed. The landscape might be completely modernized, and of course there's a very, quite comparatively very modern hotel in Springfield with a very contemporary lobby, but it's on the old grounds of the Phelps Farm.
Yes, on the grounds of the Phelps Farm, as well as there were Civil War entrenchments and right through there, and There are a couple of very large mass graves of soldiers through there uh, from the Civil War, and we were talking about University Plaza in Springfield. And ironically, not long after the hotel opened, employees started saying that they would see what appeared to be the image of a tall man in what they described as a Union officer's uniform and coat, who would walk through the lobby and down the hallways. And they have referred to him for a long time as the Colonel. And um, in fact, speculations perhaps it was Colonel Phelps. I'm not sure if it is or not, but certainly would fit the bill. But there were a number of officers who were stationed in Springfield during the war, so who knows?
And of course, you and I both been there.
Mhm.
A year and a half ago, we filmed part of our trailer in the lobby.
Yeah.
It is a very contemporary location. If you were unfamiliar with the history, it is not a location that you would walk in and associate, for example, with Civil War history, mass graves, and or ghosts.
No, you wouldn't, or any of that surrounding area, really. And
No.
um, it is one of those places that we've kind of talked about. You've talked about, history where you're not expecting it, and that is one location. Is that from outward appearances, you would not know the things that have gone on there.
No, you really would not. Now, this is jumping all the way across yet another state line,
Sure.
but a location that it is a threshold space. It is also a hotel, um, but that unlike University Plaza Hotel, when you walk in, if it isn't haunted, it should be is probably your first inclination. And it does indeed apparently have a lot of experience. I've had a very unique experience there, and that is the Crescent Hotel in Eureka Springs.
Yes. And it has the moniker right now. They tend to tout it as the most haunted hotel in America. Not so
Yeah.
sure that, it's I don't know. I mean, there are others that that certainly have tales that would rival, but it's certainly in scope, it certainly uh is definitely one of the most haunted.
It is. And I think this is a good place. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but I think it's a good place to reiterate. Kind of coming back to ghost hunting versus ghost watching, comparing it to going out to go elk hunting as opposed to bird watching. Uh, you know, depends on whether or not Dan Aykroyd's along for the ride. But it,
That could be true.
it,
Okay.
I like Dan Aykroyd. But the idea that you could say, for example, if you were a bird watcher and you were looking for a specific and comparatively rare bird, you could go out into an environment that was conducive for that particular bird species, and you could go out multiple times and never see that bird until that one special time that you did,
Right.
or someone else might go to that location and happen to see that bird.
Right.
Um, Paranormal experiences tend to be like that. We're dealing with variables that we understand even less than we understand birds.
Very true. Very, very true. Um, in fact, a investigator I used to work with years ago, he would always say, we pretend we do, but we don't know the rules on the other side. So
No, and I think that's important. On one hand, and I appreciate any location, especially because some of these locations, because of their notoriety as a hotbed of paranormal activity, uh, has allowed them to gain revenue that directly assist in preserving the location.
Yes.
And I think that from a historical and a cultural standpoint, that's incredibly interesting, and incredibly important. And that it is, of course, difficult to quantify, one way or the other. And at the same time, just because a location could have a lot of notoriety does not, by any stretch of the imagination, mean that you're guaranteed an experience.
That's very true. I mean, the same person can go to the same place 10 times and have 10 different experiences ranging from nothing happening to, you know, very spectacular in their mind. Um, and 10 people can go at the same time and have 10 different experiences. I mean, it really doesn't work that way.
It does. And I've had some interesting experiences at the Crescent. I've had a lot of just positive experiences, but no paranormal experiences at the Crescent.
But then you have as well.
But I have, yes. And of course, the first time was the doozy. And the first time was the most memorable. Sensing what really was a very dark and malevolent presence directly over my left shoulder. It's very specific, on the fourth floor skybar balcony in the middle of the afternoon, with probably 20 other people in immediate proximity to me. And I seem to be the only one who was affected by that.
And often that's the case. I mean, that does happen, even in residential cases. Often, you see the movies where everyone's being affected, but more often than not, it's usually one person that is being affected, or maybe two. And then there'll be other family members who aren't being affected. That seems to
Yeah.
be more common.
And I think, in the wrong, in the wrong context, or not wrong is not the right word, in the more unfortunate context, that can be very difficult for the person being affected, because they may feel ostracized.
Right. Or it makes them question themselves too. Is this really
Mhm.
happening to me if it's not happening to others?
Yes, in all fairness, I nearly bolted for the stairs, like Shaggy and Scooby.
Hey, and
It,
they did it every week, so if they still bolted.
exactly. I don't think a Scooby snack would have gotten me back upstairs that day. No,
Might be a couple boxes, right?
couple of boxes and give me some time. And then of course I've gone back, um as we've talked multiple times, and had nothing similar in experience.
And that's really what happens most of the time. Something happening regularly, over and over and over is fairly unusual. Um,
Yes, not impossible, but comparatively rare.
right. The example that I know of that's the most striking on that is at the Opera House in Carthage, Missouri, where you have the sound of someone falling down the back stairwell every day the same time. And it actually moves an hour with daylight savings time. So I mean, it's the same time by the sun.
Yes, which
And
is of course what actually counts anyway.
exactly. So um to the point that it's been nicknamed Thumper because it's sort of a thump 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 sound.
Mm, and
But
that's
it,
eerie.
it is, but that's that's pretty rare that something like that happens, where it happens, like clockwork.
That, of course, another, mm, comparatively haunted hotel in Eureka Springs is the Basin Park,
Hmm.
which is downtown, which is, compared to the Crescent, quite a bit younger. Um, the Crescent opened in 1886. The Basin Park Hotel opened in 1909, I believe. But there does seem to be a lot of experience there. I will be the first to admit, especially in the stairway um, leading up to the roof. To me, that's an unsettling location. Of course, it's a very small old stairway or stairwell.
Yeah.
There's that. I remember I took my nephew down to Eureka, and I had regaled him with my experiences at the Crescent, and we wandered all around the Crescent, and then and ate pizza, and then we went down to the Basin and wandered around there. And my nephew is also comparatively quite sensitive, and at one point he looked at me and he's like, "Uncle Josh, after everything that you told me about the Crescent, I was expecting to be totally creeped out. Did not feel anything there, but it's like this place creeps me out." And he was, of course, referring to the Basin Park Hotel.
Yeah. And and again, it could be the day or uh, and I also think that energies, entities, however you want to refer to them, um, tend to be attracted to certain people.
Yes,
People who are sensitive to activity tend to uh, be attractive to energy. I think obviously, but I think sometimes it's a matter that someone reminds them of someone or something seems familiar about someone, and so they're attracted to that.
yes, and sometimes that can be a very positive thing, and sometimes not.
Right, right. Or just creepy. And a lot of it has to do with the person's outlook on it and, you know, how they're feeling and that kind of thing.
Yes,
Because if, you know, if if they view, you know, a haunting, a ghost as something that is bad, they're going to have a bad experience from it.
yes,
If you accept that they are around us and that's just part of life, then typically it's not going to unsettle them nearly as much.
right. It's a very, very different experience. There's something that I think with the basin, it's kind of a two-part thing. It's is of course also references back to the residual, a residual haunting or a residual echo
Mhm.
that that is reminiscent a little of several of the locations that we talked about. But the Basin Park Hotel, as I said, I believe it was built in 1909. It was built on the footprint of an older wooden hotel that burned down.
Mhm.
And one of the anecdotal ghost experiences in association with a hotel is to see someone falling or to see flames in the atrium lobby. Someone falling in that situation. Now, what's interesting is an acquaintance of mine using went down a number of years ago and photographed throughout the Basin Park Hotel. And in I believe two of his photos up on the top floor, there is in the image what appears to be flame.
Interesting. Interesting. Um, you saying that reminded me. There's a someone told me an experience they had at Fort Scott, Kansas, very similar. And some of the buildings, they had been destroyed and in different, times and so forth. Um, and I know there was a fire either in the particular building or somewhere nearby at some point. And this was someone that I had just known because she worked at a store that I would go to all the time. And uh, wearing team shirt or whatever all the time. One day she said, "Can I tell you this, story?" And said she had been to the fort, taken the tour, and in the officers' quarters building, she goes, when you go up on the second floor and you walk into a particular door, and I said yes, and she said she walked in that door and she could see the other door at the other end with the exit sign, but everything else looked like a burned out coal.
Oh,
And
wow.
she said that really got her. And she had went back and talked to a ranger and asked if there had been a fire at some point. And they told her yes.
Mm. It's really interesting how a the idea that a high energetic or a high energy or a traumatic event can almost be seared into a location.
Well, and that's actually a theory in ghost hunting is or residual hauntings is they call it the stone tape theory, that basically energy imprints on the environment and that it gets replayed kind of like a magnetic tape in a cassette
Yes.
or a VHS tape.
Hmm.
And so that basically the space that we inhabit, we leave a bit of our energy there and
Yeah.
perhaps our experiences.
Yes. Which is very interesting. Now this is jumping to sort of our right at the state line border between Arkansas and Missouri. And interestingly enough, it's a location that is frequented by thousands and thousands of people, which is Big Cedar Lodge.
Yes, yes. Um, it is what and what people, people think of it today as this lodge. Well, originally there was a house built by the Gorman family.
Hmm.
Gorman made a fortune in railroads, and his wife Dorothy died there, and the haunting seems to be centered around her.
Yes, and there seemed to be some sort of unusual occurrences, if I remember, or an unusual situation involving her passing. Is that right?
The, there was, but I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I know it was a rather tragic death. I want to say from of a drawn out illness, if I remember right, but I may be remembering wrong.
Okay,
I
something
may be.
that yeah, something, and this is again sort of the issues of layering of experience and of course sort of unweaving the existent tapestry of what's urban legend, what is folklore, what is fact, what actually happened, all of those things. But at the very base down at the in the cove is Devil's Pool,
Yeah.
and that now, of course, is part of Table Rock Lake, but is a deep spring, and it was regarded as an important location, an important or some sort of sacred site, most likely for the Osage.
Yeah, and there's just a lot of activity around springs and so forth, and we talked about that last week, and so uh, there definitely may be more than one thing going on there.
It is. I think that, and I'm may go. I think it's peripherally important to the subject, but there's a couple of things that I think is very interesting to me about Devil's Pool and the lore, and then the potential of more recent ghost activity around it. That it to me it speaks of the latent danger the white settlers faced coming into to pioneer and to settle this country. The sense that, of course, we were calling it the New World, and in terms of our recorded history, it was, but in the microcosm, in the micro, if you are these white settlers, which of course is part of my ancestry, that are coming into this space, into what is potentially a very dangerous and foreboding land,
Hmm.
that in the back of your mind, if you're, Celtic and introspective and like me, the thing that is going on in the back of your head is, what am I actually getting into? What is the history that I don't know?
Right. And particularly for Celtic settlers, the Irish, the Scottish, the Welsh, that unseen world was very real. And
Yes,
and it paralleled a lot of the beliefs of the native tribes. And uh and maybe that's why there are so many places in the Ozarks that have the devil in their name.
I think that is quite possible. I really do. Devil's Ridge, Devil's Well, Devil's Pool, Devil's Backbone. Uh,
Devil's Promenade, all over and over and over. Devil's
yes,
Elbow. Um,
yes, and I think there's a cautionary level of that, and then really the sense, and I can't say that I love this film because I really kind of don't, but because it's so heavy-handed. But I think that from a very cliched 1980s horror movie sort of way, that Poltergeist tapped into a very real concern.
well, definitely. And the idea that we were moving on to other people's lands and burial grounds, and and leaving leaving our own, sometimes in unmarked, untended places, as we headed out to Oregon, so to speak. And
Oh yes,
that uh our country has innumerable unmarked graves,
it
whether they're
does.
native settlers, etc. And
Mhm.
some were more respectful than others when they came across them.
Yes, very very much so. And this idea, that in the case of Native American sacred sites. Of course, not all sacred sites are would necessarily be considered to be positive spaces.
That's true. I mean that's very, very true. Of course, the Devil's Promenade is an example of that. Um, I'm trying to make sure I'm remembering the one. There's a similar one, um, about summoning someone instead of the devil, down in Arkansas at Faulkner Lake. And there's a bridge, and supposedly a mother and baby died at the bridge at some point in the past. And the legend is you can summon the mother by saying, "Mama Lou, come and get me" 3 times. It's always three, by the
Mm.
way.
Yes, three does seem to have a special place in folklore, and it on the surface. Well, and but I think interesting. We talked about all these locations that have the devil's name in it. We have Scottish and Irish and Welsh and British, but of Celtic descent origin, or Celtic ethnic origin, coming into the United States. In many cases, of course, with the Ulster Scots, bringing with them um, a strong um, Presbyterian Christianity
Mhm.
with them, but then immediately underlying that, a very I think equally strong, perhaps even stronger, um, introspective Celtic folkloric belief structure.
Yes, and where what we perceive as folklore or myth was much more tangible, much
Yes,
more. Um, real, so to speak.
Yeah. And and again, things, the fact that we typically like to put things in neat, tidy boxes, but that uh, earlier peoples, who are not necessarily, by earlier I do not mean more primitive, we associate, I think erroneously associate, high technology with being advanced peoples, and that's obviously not the case. I think it's easy to see that we can be very primitive people with highly advanced toys, and that is a dangerous combination. And you look, and I come back to the Anglo-Saxon and the Celtic roots, because that's what is closest to home for my own personal journey, and my own personal understanding, and ethnicity, that we have a situation where these grand, um, cosmic worldviews that we're told have to fit in this box, or that box. These were peoples who were quite comfortable, in many cases, quite literate within their worldviews, who are oftentimes quite comfortable with a highly interlocked or melded together series of belief structures.
Exactly. And I think it's become less common over time to have that world, that ability to be comfortable with that seemingly contradictory or disparate things coexist.
Yes, yes.
And
And
and that's true of with the paranormal as well. And I think that's where a lot of people have a hard time now saying, sort of this cannot be type attitude. And it has to be something else. Well, no, it doesn't necessarily. Um,
no, it could be many things, and that's okay.
that's right. Um, off the list, what is there something there that has struck you as your curiosity?
Oh, all of it. The mm, um, 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 I think the theater in Poplar Bluff is very interesting to me.
Oh, yes, King Opera House. It is. Um, it the King Opera House is still there. Um, and it's similar. It's similar to say the Greenfield Opera House where we've had events at. Um, as far as styling and so forth. And the ghost tale there comes out of real events. And I want to say it's about 1903, 1904. Wealthy doctor owns the opera house, and his daughter falls for the manager and lead actor in a traveling theater group, company that is playing there, and plans on running up. It's sort of a Romeo and Juliet situation. Uh, they plan on running away. Daddy is going to have none of this and goes down to the train station and promptly shoots the guy. Um, and so the ghost tale basically involves people seeing this young man on stage, basically uh, reliving his last performance.
Mm, wow,
Yeah,
that that is that's sad.
it it really is. It really is. And I always say it's one thing when people tell you about, oh, something seen here, but when you can tie it to specific events, um, it gives it context. And in this situation, the apparition apparently has been identified. You know, people say this is what he looks like. You know, it looks like the young man, etc. So they're pretty sure that's who it is.
Mm, wow. That's that is sad.
It
It
is.
it you
But
take. Yeah,
if you're stuck in eternity doing something, at least it was his craft, and hopefully he enjoyed it.
absolutely. I wish him the best. I'll buy a ticket. I we've talked about theaters. We've not talked about any caves.
Oh yes.
Uh,
Um,
I think that, of course, there's we have talked about a lot of caves in the past. Um, we've got, and this would be in the very much in the borderlands, the Mark Twain cave near Hannibal,
yeah.
which is not in the Ozarks, but it is in the Ozarks borderlands. Is there is there a particular cave story that you find interesting it down around here?
Uh, there's Blowing Cave.
Yes. Now, where is that?
It is in Arkansas. I'm trying. Oh, you asked me, and I don't remember the little town off the top of my head. Um, it's not terribly far south. Um, I think it's probably within less than 100 miles from you. Um, Certainly a lot of running water in it. I mean, there's Small and Cave. There's a cave over by Ava, and the name is escaping me at the moment. That are Civil War caves that both have, you know,
Yes.
different tales of, possibly being haunted, but with events
Yes.
surrounding the Civil War.
And folks will have to tell me where this is located. It's I'm drawing from um, Judy Dockery Young's folklore book of Ozark ghost stories, but I believe it's here in Southwest Missouri. Is Farallone Cave, and I like that her telling her and Richard's telling of the story is much better than mine is, but the short version references the fact that I think a comparatively little known fact today that caves were centers of the community for a wide variety of events
Oh
back
yeah.
throughout the 19th and into the early 20th century, and that you'd go to, you know, um, basically your dances, um, community events. But by saying community events, it's also sometimes could get pretty rough,
Hmm.
and situations where there could be a lot of moonshine involved and a wide variety of things could happen. But something that to me is still very eerie is the lost fiddler of Farallone Cave. That the fiddler um, did indeed disappear in the cave and presumably died. And yet, if you listen very carefully, you could hear his mournful fiddle music echoing back from the darkness.
Definitely a little eerie.
Which, is a lot of fun. Probably less fun if you're, alone and in the dark and you were to hear the fiddle music.
Especially if your flashlight went out.
Yes, yes, and that's or if it just started going off and on because there was a ghost nearby. Um,
That too.
which talking a little about quote unquote ghost hunting, that is a technique that I find very interesting. You employed that technique at the Old English Inn on the first investigation that I accompanied you and Benton on, and tell folks a little bit about that process.
Well, and again, it's not something, and this is something I always tell people too, is that there is no sort of litmus test of this means it's paranormal. But you look at, you look at a number of things and you try different things, and the more things that line up, the more likely it is to be paranormal and not something natural. But and there are proponents and critics of flashlight work. I tend to use mag lights because they're made of aircraft grade aluminum, so they're sturdy, they don't flex, um, and basically you set them so that the battery gap is just disconnected, and you set them down, and uh, normally nothing should make that come on unless it's turned or hit hard or something to jostle it. And I've been places that you can set them up, nothing happens. I've set them up in my house. My house is built in 1889, and people who don't live here even have seen apparitions in my house, and I've never had a flashlight go on. But there are places that they do go on and off consistently, um, and seemingly in response to questions. And so critics tend to say, well, it's thermodynamics, that it's heat exchange causing the metal to flex and making the light come on and off. But it's with aircraft grade aluminum, it would take about 2,000 degrees of heat exchange to do that, and no one would be in the room. So,
Right. Welcome to the sun.
And to be candid, there are times that it happens, and it's not necessarily convincing that it's direct communication, almost like something just playing.
Yes.
An example of that, actually, it's been at the Kendrick house that set up flashlights in 2 different rooms and put cameras on them, then retreat to another room and watch by monitor. And lights come on and off in one room and just stop, and then it would start happening in the other room and just stop and go back and forth, but never at the same time. And this went on for a while, and then someone walked to the stairwell, and they were going on upstairs at that time, and just called up, okay, it's time to stop playing. Zip, just stops and nothing else happens. After they had been going on and off and switching between rooms for about 20 minutes. And do things like asking internally consistent questions, but asking the question different ways over time, and see how consistent of a response you get, things like that.
And for the record, at that particular investigation that you and I were doing, and in all fairness, the particular investigation that you and Benton were doing, and I was just along, just hanging out and visiting with y'all. We were in the first floor lobby of the Old English Inn on Downing Street, and there was the flashlights were indeed exhibiting a lot of activity for a period of time.
Mm-hmm. And then often, it will kind of fade away. Sort of a curious point too is if you set up audio in a place, it's very common that you'll get electronic voice phenomena, EVPs, while you're there. But very often, if you let it run, say, overnight or 24 hours after you leave, very common after people are gone, maybe half an hour, it all quiets down.
Mm-hmm.
That almost that you like people are the catalyst or the trigger.
Yes, and and I think there's a couple of different initial speculations on that. One of them is if we are dealing with disembodied human spirits, if there's somebody around to talk to or somebody around ostensibly to interact with, it would make sense that you would be trying to interact with the people, the physical people who came into the room. The other side that we've talked about is that, this is that spirit is essentially energy, and that bringing more energy into the room empowers or strengthens the existing energy.
Exactly. Almost like a amplifier.
Hmm. And there's a couple of other factors, or so some factors that seem to be associated um, with paranormal activity. Running water.
Running water, whether it's in a stream or underground. One thing that happens in some locations is that either faucets will come on and water run as the activity itself, or water will manifest, say, run down the wall or something, and that there's
Yes,
no source for it, and it causes no damage usually either.
which is positive but very unsettling in
Very
observation. And another thing that I think to a certain degree in terms of the lore may have taken on a life of its own, but in some cases does seem to be associated with certain activity, or the possibility of, one of the theories is entrapment of activity, is our limestone with quartz crystal.
hmm well, there seems to be an inordinate number of places in the Ozarks that with activity compared to a lot of other areas. Um, in a contained area, and I do think that geology has a role to play. And with all the limestone and high crystal content, crystal is one of the most stable conductors of electricity, energy. Um, Good example of that is satellites. They don't
Yes,
use electronics or transistors, anything like that. And haven't really since we started putting satellites up. They use quartz crystals because they won't burn out.
yes. And quartz crystals, of course, for people who don't know, are extraordinarily common in the Ozarks.
Yes, and even if it's an area that doesn't have a lot of you know uh, crystal catches, with larger crystals, the limestone bedrock in the area just has a high crystal content itself. So
It does, it does, and the buildings that there's the two locations right off the, well, three, and two of which we've already discussed. The Crescent Hotel and the Basin Park Hotel are both made of locally quarried, uh, high crystal content limestone,
mhm,
as is the Pythian Castle in Springfield.
very true, very true. And I think there are, um, I do think there's something to that. Another interesting um, association is um, over time we figured out that there are a lot of places with activity that have live railroad tracks very nearby. Uh,
Yes,
within say 100 yards, you'd be surprised. And so figured out that a moving train, we would often get very good EVPs while the train was going past. It
mm,
would be like they'd start up while that was going on, while the train was approaching and going past and receding, and then it would drop off. And started measuring EMF when trains would go by, and trains put out an enormous EMF bubble,
yes,
which you don't think about. And my first, when I realized it, my first thought was, oh, must be from the engines, but it's not. It's from the wheels um, against the tracks because
against the track.
the friction creates the EMF.
Yes, wow.
So,
And that, let's talk a little bit, and this might be we've covered a lot. We haven't covered anywhere near everything on our list. Um, but might be a good place to wind down. But just discussing EMF, electromagnetic frequency. Is that
or
right?
field. Yeah, fields.
Electromagnetic field. Yeah, my
Mhm.
bad. Um, and how, what role does that play in ghost, quote unquote, ghost hunting?
Um, it actually it does play a role. EMF is naturally occurring. There's EMF everywhere. The Earth has its own EMF field, um, and most places um, have a sort of a baseline EMF of 2 or less milligauss, and that's just what they measure it in. And but we as society has affected that through electronics. And so wiring, computers, your refrigerator, like that create EMF fields.
Yes.
And so you have to figure out, if you have a lot of EMF, you do tend to have more activity and more
Yes.
audio.
Right.
But you have to figure out what the source is, if it's man-made or natural. Or, sometimes you walk in a place and the EMF all over the place is just really high for some reason. And if you
Yes.
can't figure out a man-made reason, then that may indicate there's activity going
Right. Right. And it's certainly gotten a lot of press in terms of ghost hunting shows,
on.
and that. But and I think, but it's interesting, obviously, that that there's a lot of our equipment, our own just everyday equipment, that can produce um, the electromagnetic fields. But that, interesting enough, even in some cases, non-paranormal activity, uh, naturally occurring fields of EMF, of electromagnetic fields, can occur as well. But
Yeah.
it is really interesting. If the other thing is, if the EMF is high enough, that can actually begin to affect some human perception or behavior. Is that right?
Yes, it can. Another thing that uh, creates EMF are cell phones, which is ironic when people are selling or giving away phone apps for ghost hunting, because by definition, by running that app, you're going to increase the EMF,
Yes.
because it's when data is being sent and received that it will spike.
Yes. Yes,
Um,
it will.
and in high levels, some people are not really adversely affected by higher EMF
Hmm.
unless it gets extremely high. Others are more sensitive to it. It can create a sense of paranoia. It often creates a sensation of a presence being watched. Um, you can have auditory and visual hallucinations.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, People will see shadow men, things like that.
Wow.
Uh, and some people even get nauseous, and some people will even get a skin rash.
Oh my. Yeah. It's interesting, of course. Extreme skeptics, or individuals who are highly skeptical of paranormal activity, could easily rationalize that all paranormal observations could just be a result of a high naturally occurring EMF.
Well, I mean, and that's true, and um, it's sort of almost a double-edged sword, because it can create those things, but it can also seems to amplify. If there is something going on, it seems to amplify it.
Yes, which I
Uh,
think is very fair.
yeah, so it's kind of figuring out which is the real problem. Um,
Mm.
And uh, for people who aren't aware, if you've ever heard of a fear cage or a Faraday cage, and it's named a Faraday cage after the scientist who first discovered this. If you have a metal cage, run current through it, you create a high EMF field. And if you are inside that cage, you are affected by that. And
Yeah.
there are a couple of uses of it. It's been used during interrogations by the military and things like that. It's also used at times in spook houses for, a tunnel, usually an area where you kind of walk through a tunnel. They'll have a Faraday cage, so they're running high EMF, so people will get freaked out. They'll get that spooky feeling.
Wow. That's that's attention to detail at a spook house.
Mm-hmm. It's actually fairly common to
Wow.
use.
Very, very cool. Oh, well, how are we on time, Lisa?
Yeah, we're actually running a little past where we normally are by about 10 minutes lengthwise.
Well, I think we've got more than enough material to continue, several volumes as we move forward. Would love to get other folks' input. I mean, we've barely scratched the surface of locations to go ghost hunting.
Yes, yes. So we can touch on this other times as well, but there are a plethora of locations in the Ozarks.
Yes, yes, there are, and a lot of fun to talk about this and the processes as well.
It really is, and um, I'm interested in people's personal stories.
I am too. And of course, you and I are, as many people already know, a safe place. We can, we're very respectful for people's personal experiences, and
Yeah,
uh, and also if those experiences need to be private, but you want to share, you're more than welcome to share those with us. And if you're okay with them being public, we're excited about potentially investigating those locations, checking them out, doing more research, and sharing them with a wider audience.
exactly, and it's really the person's wishes are respected.
Yes, 100%. Living and otherwise.
Exactly. Well, I think that probably is a good place to end, and we will be back next Wednesday and hopefully have something fun to talk about.
Absolutely. Send us your ideas. Thanks everybody for watching, and thanks to you, Lisa, and also Benton for all the tech work.
And thanks, Josh, and thank you, everybody. We appreciate everyone out there.
Yes, we do.